I never thought my life would take such a dark turn, but betrayal has a funny way of sneaking up on you when you least expect it. It all started on an ordinary Tuesday afternoon, the kind where nothing feels out of place, until it does. I was sitting in my home office, sifting through some work documents, when my phone started buzzing relentlessly. The first call was from an old friend, Jake. Normally, Jake's voice had this laid-back, easygoing tone, but not this time. There was an edge to it, sharp with urgency. "I need you to set up a meeting," he blurted out, his words rushed, leaving no room for the usual small talk. I frowned, leaning back in my chair. "Slow down, Jake. What's going on?" But he wasn't interested in details. He gave me just enough to pique my curiosity, then brushed off my questions like they were irrelevant. The call ended, leaving me with this nagging feeling in the pit of my stomach. I couldn't shake it off. Before I had a chance to process, my phone rang again. This time it was Mark. His voice was tense, clipped in a way that didn't match his usual calm demeanor. "I need your advice on some family stuff," he said, his words heavy with something unsaid. "Family stuff? What kind of family stuff?" I pressed, but he dodged my questions like a pro, insisting it wasn't something he could explain over the phone. I hung up, more confused than concerned at that point. But then came another call, and another, each one from a friend who needed something urgent, yet none of them wanted to meet face to face. Robert was next. He claimed he was in a bind at work, but his voice was too flat, too rehearsed for a guy supposedly in crisis. The pattern was impossible to ignore. Each call had the same rhythm, urgent, vague, and oddly distant. I knew these guys. We'd been through thick and thin together. But something about their voices didn't sit right. It was like they were reading from the same script, each one avoiding giving me the full picture. By the time Sam called me the next morning, I wasn't even surprised. "I'm having serious issues with my business partner," he stammered, his voice trembling just enough to sound authentic, but not enough to be convincing. Later that day, James called, claiming he was stuck in some personal crisis he couldn't handle alone. And then Thomas rang, supposedly needing me to step in before things got out of hand with some competitors. It wasn't just the content of their requests, it was the delivery. Quick, tight, almost mechanical. Like they were all actors in the same bad play. I started writing everything down, names, times, the few details they offered. My instincts were screaming that something was off. I'd always trusted my gut, and right now, it felt like I was standing at the edge of a cliff, staring down into something dark and bottomless. Late one evening, after yet another cryptic call from James, I sat alone in my dimly lit office, staring at my notes. There was a pattern here, something hidden beneath the surface. But what? Then came the knock. A sharp, unexpected rap against the front door, slicing through the quiet like a blade. My heart skipped. No one visits unannounced, not at this hour. I opened the door to find Mike standing there. He looked wrong. His usually neat appearance was disheveled, rumpled clothes, dark circles under his eyes, his face drawn and tense. "I needed to see you," he muttered, glancing over his shoulder like he was being followed. His voice was low, tight with something I couldn't quite name. Fear? Guilt? Without waiting for an invitation, he stepped inside, his eyes darting around my living room like he expected something, or someone, to jump out at him. "There's something you should know," he started, but his words were fragmented, half-explained, like he was choking on secrets he wasn't ready to spill. I pressed him hard, but he just kept dodging, offering cryptic hints without ever connecting the dots. When he finally left, the house felt colder. Empty in a way I couldn't explain. And that's when I noticed it, the subtle shifts. A chair slightly out of place. A note on the kitchen counter I didn't remember writing. Little things. Things most people wouldn't notice. But I did. Because someone had been here. And they wanted me to know it. After Mike left that night, a heavy stillness settled over the house, the kind that clings to you like a shadow you can't shake. I couldn't sleep. My mind raced with everything that had happened. The calls, the evasive conversations, Mike's cryptic visit. Something wasn't right, and my gut told me I was only scratching the surface. The next evening, I came home from a quick errand, and that's when the small details started screaming at me. A chair that had always sat neatly by the dining table was now pushed to the far side of the room, like someone had used it and forgotten to put it back. On the kitchen counter, there were a few hastily scribbled notes, messages I didn't recognize, written in handwriting that wasn't mine. I moved through the house slowly, every creak of the floorboards sending a chill up my spine. It was like my own home had turned into unfamiliar territory. As I walked down the hallway, I heard it, a faint, deliberate sound. Footsteps. So careful. Coming from somewhere deeper in the house. I froze, my heart thudding in my chest. I wasn't imagining this. I checked every room, methodically, opening doors with a cautious hand. But there was no one there. Nothing out of place, except for the subtle shifts, the misplaced chair, the notes, and that lingering feeling that the walls themselves were hiding something from me. The next day, the phone calls started again. This time, it felt different. Like they weren't just checking in, they were checking on me. Seeing if I'd figured something out. Jake was the first to call. "Hey, did Mike stop by?" he asked casually, but his tone was too forced, like he was trying to sound nonchalant but failing miserably. "Yeah," I replied, my voice flat. "Why?" "He just wanted to make sure you were okay," Jake said, stumbling over his words. He was lying. I could hear it in the slight tremor in his voice. Not long after, Mark called. I heard Mike dropped in, he said quickly, as if trying to get it out before his nerve failed him. Was everything normal? Normal? I didn't answer. I just let the silence stretch until he filled it with nervous, rambling, vague excuses about Mike being stressed, dealing with some stuff, but none of it made sense. Later that afternoon, I met Robert for coffee. We hadn't seen each other in a while, and his usual easy confidence was gone. His hands fidgeted with his cup, his eyes darting around the cafe like he expected someone to jump out from behind the counter. "What's going on, Rob?" I asked bluntly. He hesitated, then shrugged. Mike's always been unpredictable. Maybe he just needed to vent. It was the worst cover story I'd ever heard. Everyone was dancing around something, speaking in half-truths and vague reassurances. But no one would look me in the eye and tell me what was really happening. That night, I sat down at my desk, surrounded by notes, trying to piece it all together. Every call, every message, every strange interaction, it was all connected. I could feel it, but the picture wasn't complete. There were gaps, missing pieces that I couldn't fill in. And then, while rummaging through a drawer, I found it. An old smartphone. One I didn't recognize. I picked it up, my fingers hesitating over the power button. This wasn't mine. How did it get here? I turned it on. The screen lit up, revealing a messaging app already opened to a group chat. My heart skipped a beat as I read through the messages. They weren't just talking about some random meeting. They were talking about me. Plans. Dates. Details about my schedule. And then, as I scrolled further, I saw her name. Lena. My wife. Her name was right there, mixed in with theirs, like it belonged. No hiding it. No code words. I stared at the screen, my breath catching in my throat. The messages weren't complicated, no cryptic language, no hidden meanings. Just plain, straightforward betrayal. They were planning something in my house. While I was supposed to be away on a business trip, I leaned back, the weight of it all crashing down on me. The phone calls, the evasive answers, Mike's visit, it all made sense now. They weren't just hiding something from me. They were conspiring. And Lena was in on it. I kept reading, my hands trembling. One message outlined the exact time of the meeting. Another listed the people involved. And then, like a punch to the gut, I saw a note about Lena's role. It wasn't optional. She was an integral part of whatever this was. The walls felt like they were closing in. I grabbed a notebook and started writing everything down. Every name. Every timestamp. Every detail. I wasn't just piecing together a puzzle anymore. I was building a case. After discovering the group chat on that forgotten phone, sleep was out of the question. I sat at my desk, staring at the screen, reading and rereading those messages until the words blurred together. The betrayal cut deeper with each line, especially seeing Lena's name woven so casually into their plans, as if it was the most natural thing in the world. But this wasn't some random gathering. They were orchestrating something. A calculated event designed to happen right under my nose. In my house. While I was supposed to be out of town. I knew I couldn't confront them yet, not without concrete proof. If I went in guns blazing, they'd spin it, gaslight me, say I was overreacting. No, I needed more. I needed to catch them in the act. I canceled my business trip without hesitation, giving my boss some vague excuse about a personal emergency. He didn't ask questions, and I didn't offer any. Back home, I gathered everything. The scribbled notes, the call logs, screenshots of the group chat. My living room looked like the aftermath of some true crime documentary. Papers spread out, red lines connecting dots only I could see. But it still wasn't enough. I needed eyes on them. Real-time evidence. Rummaging through a drawer, I found an old portable recorder, the kind I'd used for work meetings years ago. It wasn't fancy, but it would do the job. I tested it, made sure it worked, and then carefully hid it inside the folds of one of my flannel shirts hanging in the hallway closet. The angle wasn't perfect, but it would capture enough. Then I waited. The hours crawled by, thick with tension. I checked and rechecked the recorder, paced the house, every creak of the floorboards setting my nerves on edge. I felt like a stranger in my own home. That night, I pretended to leave for my trip, but instead, I circled back, slipping into the house through the back door. I found the perfect hiding spot, the hall closet. It was cramped and dark, but it gave me a clear view of the living room through the narrow gap between the door and the frame. I waited, and then I heard them. The front door creaked open, footsteps echoing through the house. Laughter, low voices, the sound of shoes being kicked off. I held my breath. Through the thin sliver of light, I saw familiar figures filing in. Jake, Mark, Robert, and then Lena. She was laughing at something Jake said, her hand lightly brushing his arm in that casual, intimate way I'd thought was reserved for me. My chest tightened, but I stayed still, forcing myself to watch. They gathered in the living room, drinking, talking, relaxed in a way that made my skin crawl. I strained to hear, and bits of conversation floated back to me, plans, inside jokes, things I wasn't supposed to know. And then it happened. Lena stood up, her face flushed from the wine, and walked over to Jake. She leaned in, whispered something in his ear, then with a quick, almost playful motion, she tugged at the waistband of his jeans, pulling them down just enough to make the whole room burst into laughter. That laughter, it was the worst part. They weren't just betraying me, they were enjoying it. My hands clenched into fists, nails digging into my palms. But I stayed put. I needed to see it all. Needed to remember every detail. Then, something shifted. Jake glanced around, his eyes narrowing slightly. His laughter faded, replaced by an uneasy look. It was like he sensed something was off. He whispered to Lena, and I saw her face change, her smile disappearing, replaced by something colder. She pointed. At the closet. My heart stopped. They knew. Panic surged through me, but rage swallowed it whole. I wasn't going to stay hidden, cowering in the dark like some forgotten secret. I kicked the door open with all the force I had, the closet bursting open like a trap sprung too soon. The room went dead silent. Jake's face drained of color. Mark dropped his drink, the glass shattering on the floor. Robert took a step back, his mouth opening and closing like he couldn't find the right words. And Lena, she just stared at me. No fear. No guilt. Just a blank, unreadable expression. I stepped out, my chest heaving, my gaze locked on her. You think I wouldn't find out? I growled, my voice low and steady despite the storm raging inside me. No one answered. They didn't have to. The guilt was written all over their faces, except for Lena's. She didn't flinch. Didn't blink. She just crossed her arms and said, "Well, now you know." That was it. No apology. No explanation. Just those 4 words. And in that moment, something inside me snapped. The room was suffocating, thick with tension and the sharp, acrid scent of spilled alcohol. Their faces, Jake's paling with shock, Mark's wide-eyed and trembling, Robert standing there like a deer caught in headlights. And then Lena, my wife, arms crossed, standing there like she was bored with the whole situation, as if me catching them in the act was nothing more than an inconvenient interruption. Her words echoed in my head over and over again. Well, now you know. That was it. No apology. No scrambling to explain. Just those cold, indifferent words. And it hit me harder than if she'd screamed, harder than if she'd cried and begged for forgiveness. Her complete lack of remorse was like a slap to the face. I stepped fully into the living room, the weight of betrayal pressing down on my chest like a vice. My pulse roared in my ears, but I kept my voice low, steady, a dangerous kind of calm. So this is what it's been about? All the calls, the lies, the sneaking around? I looked from one face to the next, daring them to answer. No one spoke. Jake shifted uncomfortably, his jaw tightening like he wanted to say something but didn't have the guts. Mark couldn't even meet my eyes, staring down at the floor like it held all the answers he didn't have. Robert just stood there, frozen. And Lena, she shrugged. It was like pouring gasoline on a fire already raging inside me. I let out a bitter laugh, shaking my head. You couldn't even bother to hide it properly. Did you really think I was that stupid? Still, silence. Just the faint sound of someone's shaky breath and the distant ticking of the clock on the wall. A cruel reminder of all the time I'd wasted trusting them. Then Jake finally found his voice. Look man, it's not what you think. Not what I think? I snapped, stepping closer. I saw everything. I heard everything. You think hiding in a damn closet was part of my weekend plans? Jake flinched, his bravado crumbling like the fragile facade it was. He opened his mouth to say more, but I cut him off with a glare that shut him up instantly. And that's when Lena spoke again, her voice flat, void of any emotion. You were never really here anyway. Always buried in work, always distant. This didn't just happen overnight. Her words sliced deeper than any knife. She wasn't just admitting to the betrayal, she was justifying it, as if her loneliness was a hall pass for infidelity. Oh, so this is my fault now? I shot back, my voice rising despite the tight grip I was trying to maintain on my temper. I was working to build a life for us. While you were what? Playing house with my friends? Jake stepped in then, his face twisted with some pathetic attempt at bravado. Look, we didn't plan for this. It just happened. Those words. It just happened. Like cheating is some kind of accident, like you trip and fall into someone's bed. I took a step closer to Jake, my fists clenched so tight my knuckles turned white. You're a coward, I spat, my voice low, vibrating with fury. Hiding behind excuses, behind her. Jake backed up instinctively, bumping into the coffee table, sending a glass tumbling to the floor. His fear was palpable, and I savored it for a fleeting second, the same way they'd savored betraying me. But it wasn't enough. I needed more than words. I needed proof, undeniable, irrefutable evidence of their treachery. Without breaking eye contact, I reached into my shirt pocket and pulled out the recorder, holding it up like a trophy. Their faces changed instantly, fear, guilt, realization all washing over them in waves. Every word, I said, my voice a deadly whisper. Every lie. Every laugh. I got it all. Lena's face finally cracked, her cool indifference slipping for just a second. You're insane, she hissed, stepping toward me. No, I replied coldly. I'm awake. I turned and walked out of the room, leaving them in stunned silence. But I wasn't done. Not by a long shot. I made my way to the garage, my footsteps echoing in the emptiness, every step fueled by the betrayal burning in my chest. I grabbed the gas canister I kept for emergencies, its cold metal handle biting into my palm. The betrayal wasn't going to sit quietly in the corner of my life. It was time to set it on fire. The cold metal of the gas canister felt heavy in my hand, not just in weight, but with the finality of what I was about to do. My heart wasn't racing anymore. The rage had settled into something colder, more focused, a quiet storm building beneath the surface. I walked back toward the driveway, the night air crisp against my skin. The silence outside was deafening compared to the chaos simmering inside the house. I glanced over my shoulder briefly, half expecting them to come after me, to stop me, to say something. But there was nothing. Just the faint murmur of their voices, still inside, probably arguing about what had just happened, scrambling to figure out what to do next. Pathetic. I moved with purpose, unscrewing the cap of the canister, the sharp, chemical scent of gasoline hitting me like a slap in the face. It was grounding, in a way, reminding me that this wasn't a nightmare I'd wake up from. This was real. I started with Jake's car, pouring the gasoline over the hood, watching as it glistened under the pale moonlight. The liquid spread easily, dripping down the sides, pooling beneath the tires. Then Mark's car, then Robert's. Methodical. Controlled. Like I was crossing items off a to-do list. With every splash of gasoline, I felt lighter, like I was washing away the weight of their betrayal. When I was done, I stepped back, reached into my pocket, and pulled out a pack of matches. I struck one, the tiny flame flickering to life, warm and alive against the cool night air. I stared at it for a moment, the flame dancing like it knew something I didn't. Then I tossed it. The fire roared to life instantly, hungry and fierce. Flames licked up the sides of the cars, devouring the betrayal I'd soaked into the metal. The heat hit me like a wall, but I didn't flinch. I just stood there, watching as everything burned. The sound was deafening, the crackle of the flames, the pop of tires bursting, glass shattering under the heat. It was chaos, but it felt like clarity. Like the fire wasn't just consuming their cars, it was consuming every lie, every broken promise, every whispered betrayal. Then came the voices, panicked shouts from the house. I turned to see them spilling out the front door, their faces twisted in shock and fear as they saw the inferno I'd left for them. Jake stumbled forward, his mouth moving, probably shouting my name, but I couldn't hear him over the roar of the flames. His eyes were wide, filled with something I'd been waiting to see, fear. Real, undeniable fear. Lena was right behind him, her face pale, her arms wrapped around herself like she was trying to hold in all the things she should have said but didn't. I didn't move. I didn't run. I just stood there, letting them see me, letting them feel the weight of what they'd done reflected in the firelight. Eventually, the sirens started in the distance, faint at first, growing louder. But I didn't care. Let them come. I had nothing left to hide. As the flames raged, I walked back into the house. The living room was empty now, abandoned in their rush to deal with the fire outside. I moved through the space slowly, gathering the notes, the messages, every scrap of evidence that tied them together. My recorder still tucked safely in my pocket. Upstairs, in our bedroom, the one Lena and I had shared, I found her phone on the nightstand. I picked it up, scrolling through her messages. More of the same. Lies wrapped in casual words, plans hidden behind emojis and half-hearted "I miss yous." I sat on the edge of the bed and started typing. A message. Simple. Final. I'm done. We're over. Consider this my official goodbye. I hit send, not bothering to see if she'd read it. Then I pulled out a piece of paper from the drawer, scribbled one last note. I loved you once. I don't even recognize you now. I left it on the pillow, like a gravestone for what used to be. Before I walked out the door, I took one last look around the house. The place where we'd built memories, now nothing more than a crime scene of lies and betrayal. I didn't feel sadness. I felt free. The house faded behind me, swallowed by the darkness, the flickering glow from the burning cars casting long, jagged shadows across the driveway. The sirens were louder now, closing in, flashing lights reflecting off the windows like a twisted disco ball of red and blue. I didn't care. Let them come. I walked down the street, my footsteps slow, deliberate, as if the ground itself needed to feel every ounce of the weight I'd been carrying. My phone buzzed in my pocket, but I didn't bother looking. I already knew who it was. Lena, maybe Jake, probably both. Their panic would be fresh now, the realization sinking in that everything they thought they'd kept hidden had been dragged into the light, burned for the world to see. But I didn't have a plan beyond this. For the first time in my life, there was no strategy, no calculated next move. Just me, walking away from the wreckage of what used to be my life. I found a small park a few blocks away, the kind with rusted swings and creaky old benches. I sat down, staring at nothing, the cool metal of the recorder still in my pocket, a quiet reminder of how this all began. I pulled it out, pressing play, letting the voices wash over me one last time. The laughter, the whispers, the undeniable proof of their betrayal. It didn't hurt anymore. It was just noise. By the time the sun began to rise, painting the sky with streaks of pink and orange, my phone had stopped buzzing. I guess they'd given up, or maybe they were too busy dealing with the mess I left behind. Either way, it didn't matter. They were part of a chapter that was closed, burned, and buried under the ashes of their own making. I thought about Lena then, not the woman she'd become, cold and distant, but the girl I'd met all those years ago. The one with the shy smile and the kind eyes. That version of her was gone, and maybe she'd been gone for a long time. I just hadn't wanted to see it. But now I did. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my wedding ring. It felt heavier than I remembered, like it had been carrying the weight of lies all this time. I held it between my fingers for a moment, then stood up and threw it as far as I could. It landed somewhere in the tall grass, lost forever, exactly where it belonged. I didn't feel anger anymore. Just relief. As I walked away from the park, I realized something. They thought they'd broken me. But all they'd done was set me free. Free from the lies. Free from the weight of pretending everything was okay. Free from the people who never deserved me in the first place. I didn't know where I was going, but for the first time in a long time, that didn't scare me. Because the worst had already happened. And I was still standing. I want to express my heartfelt gratitude to each and every one of you for watching my videos, sharing them, and supporting me along the way. Your views, comments, and likes are the driving force behind my passion to create captivating and unexpected stories. Every tale I share is more than just a plot. It's a journey of emotions, lessons, and reflections that we experience together. Your engagement brings life and soul to this channel. Thank you for sticking with me until the very end of each video, because the finale of every story is where the real impact lies. I promise to continue delivering twists and turns that surprise, inspire, and resonate with your hearts.